With news that we might be getting the massively underrated Farscape series back, I have to ask the question, what other massively underrated sci-fi shows were there? And what are my top three? Welcome to SciTrek, your sci-fi TV and movie channel. I say top three, it's actually going to be top four, but I'm going to lump two of them together, so let's pretend it's a top three. But what is first on my list? Lexx. It ran from 1997 to 2002, and it is one of the very rarest of things. A TV show produced in cooperation between Canada and Germany. Can you imagine what those two cultures would produce? Well, they produced a TV show called Lexx, and it was as mental as you'd imagine. I cannot really tell you what this show was about, even though I watched it religiously for 5 years. I remember the guy with the black hair, and he had the thing, and it's like, he was like he was living dead or something. And I kind of remember that the spaceship was a giant bug, and it used to like have like death rays. I think that was the Lexx. I think it was the ship that was the Lexx, if I remember right. And I genuinely remember being fascinated and completely confused by every single episode. When this show was released, critics actually said that this was for people that liked Babylon 5 but wanted to be a little less cerebral. I actually think, though, you really needed to concentrate when watching Lexx because it really threw a lot of different concepts at you. I actually think it was massively underrated, partly because people didn't really understand what was going on. But it was one of those shows that you could analyze and you could think about, and that you could go into the pub the next day with your mates and have a couple of pints and just go, what the freaking hell was that about? And it would trigger lively debate. It was exciting. It was gory at times. It was violent. It was pretty low budget, but they got every dollar on the screen. And it did bravely push boundaries. As I said, no clue what was happening, but it was fascinating to watch. And yeah, most definitely underrated. Number two on my list is a show that was underrated because basically the person that kind of co-created it, William Shatner. I actually remember when this came out, and it was sort of a joke that he'd written a bunch of novels, and that even though there was a ghostwriter involved as well, it was sort of, what's William Shatner doing writing novels? And the show sort of really only existed because William Shatner was involved, and obviously, big star. The series concept, though, was genius. There was sort of this like cybernetic digital drug that created sort of like a simulated reality, a matrix kind of thing for anyone that took it. Early in the things, it was massively addictive and triggered loads and loads of crimes, and actually caused significant brain damage for a lot of users in the early versions of the drug in a couple of first seasons. But this was a show that did get 5 seasons and like 4 or 5 TV movies, all based on the 9 novels that William Shatner and his co-writer did produce. The show, though, was clever, and I honestly think it was inspirational for a lot of shows that followed it. I'm thinking shows like Fringe, which did have a similar feel to a lot of the plots. I also think, the movie The Matrix, it does feel like the Wachowski brothers maybe saw TechWars. I actually think this is one of those shows that was maybe a little bit ahead of its time. And if it had come along just a couple of years later when social media was really starting to kick off, then I think it might have actually captured the imagination a little bit more. I actually think it was possibly because it was just a couple of years too soon, it went over a lot of people's heads a little bit. They didn't realize the dangers of the digital world, so weren't maybe afraid of the possibilities the show was raising because we hadn't got into the digital age quite yet. It was a brilliantly interesting show. I loved it mainly because William Shatner was in it. I'll be honest. He was the main reason why I started watching Boston Legal, because I just saw William Shatner was in it and I just thought, well, I'm watching that. And actually, Danny Crane in that is just his best character by a million miles. And if you've never watched Boston Legal, why not? William Shatner and James Spader are in it. What else have I got to say? Number one on my list is a twofer, but for a very good reason. Andromeda and Earth Final Conflict. Now, Andromeda starred Kevin Sorbo, a man who I follow on Twitter, or X, or whatever the hell it's called. And he's colourful. He's a very colourful conservative, let's say, and he has some opinions on the world and politics that I do wholeheartedly disagree with. But as an actor, I always really liked him. I thought Hercules was brilliant, and I started watching Andromeda because he was in it. We had Lexa Doig, or Lexa Doig, however you say her name, Doig. How am I supposed to say that? Who actually then married Michael Shanks, our own Daniel Jackson, and then appeared in Stargate as well. So this show really did have everything. An insanely beautiful woman who I was massively in love with, and Michael Shanks, you lucky bugger. The series, though, is being thrown together with Earth Final Conflict because both of these shows were dreamed up, at least originally, by Gene Roddenberry. Now, his wife, Majel Roddenberry, actually was executive producer for Earth Final Conflict. And now I'm not going to talk about that so much because of one very good reason. I didn't like it. It was a bit like V, the way it started. This alien race came down, pretended to be our friends, but really wasn't. It meandered, though, and in the fifth season, it completely forgot about that original race and went with this completely different race that was like openly violent against us. I don't know if executives over at the channel basically said, you need to do something different. We're losing viewers. So they just went, screw it, let's just do something crazy. But it really didn't fit with the rest of the series. They also had a problem with the cast. They turned over loads. They had loads of different cast members, and it was just a very difficult show to follow. But the actual concepts were really fascinating. It was well written, and it was an interesting show. But Andromeda was a good show. It had some really brilliant concepts in there. For one, the Andromeda was a very powerful starship. And I loved how they had the drones that used to walk around repairing the ship all the time. That was the first time I'd ever really seen that in a sci-fi series, and something that's been copied since. Something that was thought up by Gene Roddenberry all those years before. The show came out at a time where we didn't really have any Star Trek or anything other like big sci-fi shows. So it sort of filled my need for. It was a show that had some really interesting ideas, but was basically quite simple. It was a Star Trek type show where there's a ship, there's an enemy, badoo badoo badoo, fight, 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 and crack on. It was just one of those shows that, okay, wasn't massively complicated, but was just well made. And it ended too soon for me. I do think the later seasons lost a bit of their mojo. They didn't really know where they were going. They never really had a decent villain, and that was the biggest problem with the series, really. The villain was kind of forgettable, and to be honest, I can't tell you a single one of them. So I'd have to Google them to even tell you what any of them were. So that was why the show never really got catapulted into greatness. But it is a show that was beautifully made, had great characters, had really interesting action sequences, etc., and was just a show that deserved a little bit more attention. And maybe if it had got that at the time, it could have pushed on and become a really great sci-fi series. It deserved that little bit more. And that's why it's going to be the top of my list as the most underrated of the sci-fi shows, because it was almost brilliant. But guys, get into the comments and tell me what other sci-fi shows that you think over the years have been massively underrated. There have been a few, and I'm actually just going to throw in one other show, The Killjoys, that was also on Sci-Fi. That was another show that really deserved more than it got. But what shows do you want to add to the list? Get into the comments and tell me. If you are new to the channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification because it really helps us out and you'll never miss any of our new videos. Also, you can go to patreon.com/SciTrek, which is where most of our videos premiere first and you get to see them without the adverts. Also, you can go to scitrek.co.uk, which is our dedicated website where we do articles based on most of our videos, and we try to add a little bit more information for you to digest. Go and check it out. As always, please stay safe, and I'll see you next time.